The CDC attributes about 79,000 deaths per year in the U.S. to alcohol and about 443,000 to tobacco. I couldn't find their number on weed-related deaths because there simply aren't enough to merit its own statistic. So, why is weed illegal in the U.S., Uncle Sam? Here are some facts. In the 1930s, William Randolph Hearst was a publishing magnate, and the DuPont company had just secured patents for processes to make plastics. In 1936, a thresher was patented that made harvesting hemp easier, which could have made hemp a competitor to industrial products like plastics and papers. In 1930, Harry Anslinger became commissioner of the spanking new Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He was appointed by Andrew Mellon, an industrial tycoon with many business interests, including oil, which is used to make plastics. There was also a growing anti-Mexican sentiment in the U.S., and Mexican immigrants were associated with what they called marijuana. Weed was also associated with black jazz musicians at the time. A national campaign against marijuana began. Hearst published many anti-weed articles. Films like Reefer Madness and Marijuana, the Devil's Harvest were produced. And Commissioner Anslinger distributed a collection of quotes from police reports about weed that he called the Gore Files, which included quotes like, "There are 100,000 total marijuana smokers in the U.S., and most are Negroes, Hispanics, Filipinos, and entertainers. Their satanic music, jazz, and swing result from marijuana use. This marijuana causes white women to seek sexual relations with Negroes, entertainers, and any others." So, in 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, which levied a tax and included a complex set of rules of enforcement to which weed or hemp handlers were subject. It was the first step toward the criminalization of weed and hemp. So many people believe that weed was made illegal in the United States to protect the financial interests of the paper and chemical industries. Still others believe it was because of racism and cultural wars, and others believe it was outlawed because it's simply bad for you. But given the deadly statistics about tobacco and alcohol, I highly doubt that. If that were the case, then alcohol and tobacco and hydrogenated fats, for that matter, should also be illegal. The truth of the matter is, it was probably all of those reasons combined, and a couple others thrown in, like preventing a shakeup in the pharmaceutical industry, because nothing is cut and dry in our political system. And we're a capitalist nation, so money is usually going to be involved in one way or another.
The plant we call marijuana, or hemp, has served mankind. From it we made paper, fabric, rope, and fuel. And like fire and water, it helped us climb the ladder of civilization. One fortunate, harmless side effect was the fact that it contained a chemical called THC, which, if ingested, would make humans feel good. Many people assume hemp was made illegal through some kind of process involving science, medical, or government hearings in order to protect the citizens from what was determined to be a dangerous drug. Well, not at all. Here's what really happened. In the 1930s, investor-publisher William Randolph Hearst invested heavily in thousands of acres of timberland to make paper. But at the same time, Hearst's tree paper was in direct competition with the established hemp paper. And Hearst was also in the business of printing newspapers. So, Hearst joined forces with the DuPont company, who, by the way, was developing a fabric called nylon, which was in direct competition with hemp cloth. Together, they would cook up a scheme to take hemp completely off the market so their individual enterprises could flourish. While the DuPont company relentlessly lobbied Washington with clever propaganda, Hearst began a racist smear campaign printed in his many newspapers to convince common Americans that hemp, or marijuana, was an evil drug. Enter the extremely ambitious Harry J. Anslinger, America's first head of the Bureau of Narcotics. At the time, he was pushing for a restriction on opiates and cocaine, but it would certainly help to build his career and his agency if he added marijuana to that short list. After all, Hearst and DuPont had done an excellent job with their propaganda. Marijuana influences Negroes to look at white people in the eye, step on white men's shadows, and look at a white woman twice. The rest is an embarrassing and dismal history. The demonizing of marijuana is wrong, inaccurate, and harmful.
The reasons that marijuana is illegal today are many and complicated.
The government and politicians have failed to listen to many, many government commissions that over the past 100 years have said that marijuana should not be criminalized.
The only powerful organized forces on the issue were those that were advocating for keeping it illegal.
Marijuana is illegal because there's a perception of harm behind it. People think it's so harmful that it must remain illegal for all people to use.
In the 1930s, I think there were some misunderstandings about marijuana. There are all kinds of side issues about whether we should encourage or discourage the hemp industry as opposed to maybe some other fibers. There are issues involving prohibition, which had just ended, and the question of how much competition do we want with this new beer and alcohol industry.
It was basically a corporate conspiracy that lives to this day. It's now grown to serve the purposes of the law enforcement community generally. It's a full employment for cops and all the people associated with that. What a waste of money.
It dates from a wave of complete hysteria and exaggerated propaganda back in the 1920s and 30s.
You know, the reason why it was made illegal is pretty clear when you look at the historical record of the reefer madness days. Totally racism, totally against immigration.
The origins were obviously in racism, and you also had the prohibition establishment, alcohol prohibition establishment that sort of found themselves out of work and were able to latch on to another substance that they could very easily demonize because people didn't really know what it was. They put a Spanish name on it, marijuana, which sounded quite scary to a lot of Americans, and were sort of able to demonize this and keep their network established and flourishing around a drug that people had a lot less experience with than they did with alcohol.
It's the easiest thing in the world for the police to concentrate on catching a cannabis user. It's much easier to detect someone smoking a joint in an alleyway than it is someone doing a line in a bathroom. And so it takes a very low level. It's what do they call the lowest group that gets picked.
Marijuana is illegal because the people want it to be illegal. If you look at the polling, it's only 36% of the American people support making marijuana legal. So it's what the people want, is to keep it illegal. Now, why is that? The main reason is, of course, because of the government and its disinformation campaign ever since the federal government made marijuana illegal in 1937. So when you have literally billions of dollars being spent over the course of 70 years to trash marijuana, the image of marijuana users by the federal government, and then you don't have a response to that by people who are willing to actually tell the truth, then you're going to have a populace that's very afraid and misinformed. And that's what we have now.
At the end of the 19th century, Indian migrants brought cannabis into Mexico, where it was named marijuana, and then became the symbol of Pancho Villa's rebellion with the song La Cucaracha.
Mexican farmers on their side copied the Indian water-letting process to prepare the fibers. They made every kind of product, from hats to bags and carpets.
Marijuana traveled from Mexico to the southern states of America. Black people working in the cotton plantations smoked it to try and soften their harsh lives, which were aggravated by the economic aftermath of the Civil War. Marijuana fever hit the suburbs of Louisville through Dixieland jazz and swing. Marijuana was known in America as reefer or grass. Within a few years, reefer songs spread widely from the music clubs which had appeared everywhere where the immigrant black community settled.
Have you ever met that funny reefer man? Have you ever met that funny reefer man?
Along with new developments in the hemp industry and a growing awareness of the dangers of alcohol, marijuana began to be the subject of interest in the corridors of political power.
In 1911, New Orleans and then Louisiana and Mississippi and A couple of states along the Mississippi River outlawed marijuana.
Meanwhile, alcohol was increasingly being seen as a danger to society. American women lobbied for alcohol to be banned. They succeeded with prohibition, which led to illegal speakeasies, the proceeds of which enriched criminals and resulted in violence and gang warfare. Alcohol was legalized again in 1933.
Then all of a sudden alcohol was becoming legal again, and all these agents didn't have anything to do, and Harry Anslinger thought, well, we should have a law against hemp, and so did William Randolph Hearst, and so did DuPont, and the three companies got together, and other people claiming the cotton industry joined in to outlaw hemp because it was making a huge comeback. And the reason it was making a huge comeback is that it took 200 to 300 hours to plant, harvest, and make ready for fiber, acre of hemp. But all of a sudden, in the 30s, in the 1930s, that 200 or 300 man-hours per acre went down to 1 man-hour per acre. It was a better fiber than any other fiber and previous hemp fibers. And that was the beginning of the end of all fibers, as being the only synthetic. Nylon was the new synthetic, would have to make way for the reintroduction of hemp as an inexpensive fiber, as well as the strongest, the best, the longest lasting, and the softest fiber. The government of the United States outlawed a fiber and forced the rest of the world to swallow it. They swallowed the outlawing of the #1 fiber on Earth for 10,000 years until the 1930s, and then they outlawed it completely.
China, the hemp country, was part of the Japanese plan for military conquest.
But in official Tokyo, seat of an empire which for nearly a decade has been governed by its stern and ruthless military caste, there is more activity, more secret comings and goings than in many a year. The little men who command the world's third largest navy see in the South Pacific the richest of all colonial prizes. The Philippines, a group of 7,091 Pacific islands which, still under the protection of the U.S. flag, constitute the only major hazard to Japanese plans for new conquest in the war year of 1940. Already one important island industry, the growing and processing of Manila hemp, is almost entirely under Japanese control. And within the past few years, by intensive cultivation, Japanese immigrant farmers have increased production of the one cash crop which has long been a virtual Philippine monopoly.
The invasion of the two big hemp-producing countries, China and Philippines, was the start of hemp rationing. Hitler was also aware of the strategic importance of hemp, which was used in the making of canvas and ropes, both of which were an essential part of his war effort. In 1941, when the German army invaded Russia, it blocked Britain's supply of Russian hemp. Germany managed to develop her own hemp production, but the cultivation of this fiber, which had become so necessary in wartime, was still banned in Great Britain. In 1942, the German troops reached the center of Russia. The land continued to produce hemp, which enabled Hitler to move confidently to the next stage of his plans for the Reich. To safeguard its own supplies of hemp, Great Britain urged India to increase production. Meanwhile, war was spreading to Japan.
Within little more than a year, Japan, successfully employing once again the deceit and treachery which had so well served her in the past, had taken the final desperate plunge.
When Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, forcing the United States of America to declare war, Americans realized they were cut off from their hemp supplies. The U.S. Navy was totally dependent upon hemp for rot-resistant ropes for their ships, and for many other components. The American government then decided to redevelop their hemp industry. Marijuana was legalized again and farmers received seeds. A propaganda film called Hemp for Victory was then made to encourage this war effort.